absorbing more CO2 now?
Because up to a certain, it's like in a greenhouse, when you increase CO2 levels, plants grow faster. And photosynthesis becomes more efficient with higher CO2 levels. It's something that the climate change deniers like to play up, but it is also a fact. Now, up to a certain point, because beyond a certain point, you end up with temperatures becoming too extreme for the plants, or weather becoming too extreme for the plants, and then you end up with dieback. Now, during that, with really forest dying back. But during the short period window we've got at the moment something like 50% of all the carbon that we emit from burning fossil fuels doesn't end up in the atmosphere. It ends up half of it in the oceans and half of it actually accumulated by the biosphere, even though we're chopping down forests. This is, it's like a little kind of, call it negative feedback or kind of gift of nature to basically shield us from half the effects of the global warming we're causing at the moment. It's an energy accumulation, but if you simply burn that excess energy, well, then putting all the carbon straight into the atmosphere again, you get more global warming. Okay?
But isn't there more decomposition also in warmer conditions? So though the plants take in more CO2, in warmer conditions they rot down quicker.
That's what we think will happen. Larger. Absolutely, in the longer term. But in the short term, there is net carbon sequestration in the biosphere. There has been for the last 200 years. But most climate scientists say you can't rely on that continuing. It will, and it's starting to. Certainly in the signs that boreal forests are starting to die. Starting to give out more carbon dioxide than they take in now because of climate change. It's reversing.
It isn't good that more carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the oceans as well, because that's increasing ocean acidification.
Absolutely, yes, completely. It's a short-term window that we've basically been shielded from the worst effects of global warming, but it's not going to last.
James Lovelock can eat his heart out.
And Albert, you say that basically solar radiation would not be enough to counteract the glaciation.
No, that was not what's happening now. This is what would have happened millions of years ago.
But solar radiation would not have been enough to counteract that.
Well, there was a state of snowball Earth that they think would have lasted for many millions of years. It's really interesting if you read up about it. No, not in its own, because when you have very, very low carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, then you've got very little greenhouse effect.
Think what Mars is like.
And high albedo as well. So.
High albedo, reflective. The ices will reflect back energy. So it's just, I kind of thought of that as just an example of why it couldn't, it's kind of the premise of the big bioenergy. It's kind of wrong, it can't be. You can't have big energy creation by the biosphere. But should we go to the next, is that, okay? Should we go to the next bit, Ollie? Whoever, slide? There, sorry. Oh, sorry, Neil.
I was going to ask one more question. Are you, obviously there's energy inside the core of the planet as well. Are you inside the core of the planet as well?
The core.
There's thermal energy inside the planet. Are you taking that into account as well?
Yeah. But you still had, you've had swings in the Earth's history where you had, say, global warming events that took hundreds of thousands of years to go back to normal, and where you had cooling events like really in ancient history. They are very over geological timescales. You would probably not always have had a snowball Earth, but you would have massive swings which would have made life on Earth very difficult to be sustained. So, what's the upshot of that? The main upshot of that is that bioenergy has the largest footprint of all forms of energy. And that is simply because plants don't really create much energy. Now, this is from a US study, and it has, bioenergy at the top. Really up to here is bioenergy, and the rest then you have wind, hydropower, fossil fuel, solar, petroleum, solar photovoltaics, natural gas, solar thermal. Some studies would show, would argue whether wind or solar have a bigger land footprint. But what none of them would disagree with is that bioenergy has by far the largest footprint. And when I say this is for energy, this doesn't take account of the energy that goes into growing crops, into transporting wood pellets, into the fertilizers needed. It's simply the energy from, taking the biomass from a hectare of land, burning it. But on the other hand, it doesn't take account of the energy that goes into building a wind turbine or coal power station or getting oil out of the ground either, so that's the case for everything. So yeah, you just got a massive land footprint, and whilst we have a lot of every day in the newspapers about groups complaining about the land footprint of onshore wind, well, compare that to biomass. It is really a tiny fraction of the land footprint by energy. Okay, next. So this is a really beautiful, I just copied that out. This is from a presentation that someone called Professor Todd Patrick from University of Berkeley did in 2007, which I just love it. It's Indefensible Assumptions of the big biomass lobby. So the assumption of the pro-bioeconomy idea is that fossil fuels we use to produce anything are the only relevant limiting factor. All other factors are limitless and irrelevant. The Earth provides us with an indefinite and instantaneous supply of pure air, fertile soil, and clean water full of nutrients. She can regenerate all soil we destroy and can purify all water and air we pollute. Forever she can feed 7 to 12 billion people, 1 billion cows, and all other non-human living consumers of plant and animal matter, and now 1 billion cars and trucks. And you could say that was 2007. You may, today you can add on that, and on top of that, loads of feed our power stations and feed our heating systems and feed much of the chemical industry as well.
And aviation.
And aviation, that's right.
Who is this bloke?
Planes. Can feed
Who
planes.
is this person?
Sorry?
Who is he?
Todd Patrick, he was a professor at the time. I don't know where he works now, but at UC Berkeley in California. I can send around the link afterwards. He did some absolutely brilliant presentations of biofuels.
But this isn't his words then?
Yes, that's his words. I put that in quotation marks.
Yeah, but he
Yes.
said that they are indefensible assumptions.
Yeah.
He's saying that they are
He's
indefensible.
They're all
saying,
rub-
He's saying that the indefensible assumptions, and then he's got another slide afterwards about
The reality.
the reality. But I
Okay.
thought
it's not
it's
him,
pretty obvious. The reality is the opposite.
it's not him saying that though.
No, he calls it the indefensible assumptions.
I don't quite understand what's the first point. Can you explain the first point a bit? I'm just not
Well,
sure
the
I
first
understand
point
what you mean
is when people speak about the whole problem with that the whole limit problems we have with climate change and the future of the Earth can be solved as long as we stop burning fossil fuels. Everything else isn't quite so bad. That's the first point. Which of course isn't true. We have to stop burning fossil fuels, but there's a lot of other harm we can do to the planet.
I think I'm
as well.
not agreeing with that.
No, he's being sarcastic, I think.
He's being sarcastic.
Sorry, sorry.
He said that indefensible assumptions at the top.
Yeah, but that to me sums up everything that we need to get happening, like the climate summit in December now, that the UN is failing to get
Yes.
shouted about. And obviously
Yeah, I mean, what he's
Forrest
basically
Forrest has got his own agenda, but
Yeah.
yeah, all
What-
the other stuff that's
What it's basically
destroying-
saying is yes, we need to stop
nature,
burning
yeah.
fossil fuels, but we need to remember, we don't, we depend on fresh water, we depend on fertile soils, we depend on biodiversity, we depend on ecosystems that help stabilize the climate as well. And we can't trash all that and think we're going to save the planet just by burning less
Yeah.
fossil fuels. That we have to, but it's not nearly enough.
Oh, yeah, it's so nice to hear somebody say that. Because I've watched recent years. I haven't had so much work. I'm older, and I've been able to watch the yearly climate summits here on video. And I'm just waiting for a world leader to say something on this level.
China and the US.
Yeah,
Take a look at the guy from the Philippines at the last summit, the representative from the Philippines. Just have a look at that.
Yeah, I think there was somebody, I think two actually, that touched on something
Yeah,
good, but
we're going off subject.
yeah. Well, not really. No, yeah. It's important.
Do the next slide.
Yep.
Yeah, that just going back to the land footprint is, I mean, I've read quite a number of the studies that look at the biomass potential, and historically, if you look at how Europe's bioenergy policy evolved, it was preceded by and subsequently supported by academic studies about that claim that there's a really big potential for sustainable bioenergy. And they all come up with different figures. But what they all agree with is that the vast majority of the, if you want to have large-scale bioenergy, the vast majority of it will have to come from dedicated crops and trees. So this is, this is one study. Speaking of surplus agricultural land, rest land, degraded land, and pasture. This is residues. So if you add all this up, it's this compared to that, to this, is what the forecasts are. So if somebody tells you, oh, we can do it all from like residues and wastes, that's problematic in itself because it means taking nutrients out of the carbon cycle, out of the soils. But all the studies that underlie our biofuel targets, our bioenergy policy in the UK, assume that the vast majority of it will come from dedicated land. They simply claim that there is heaps of surplus land on the planet. And of course the people who tend to live on, depend on that surplus land would beg to differ. Okay, next.
Can I just, can you go back to the previous, sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Can I just pick up on two words that are in that two-line caption? Sorry, the word optimistic and the word dedicated.
Okay, I'll see it.
It's interesting how the language is used, because I would interpret the word optimistic referring to previous slides.
Okay.
That's optimistic means steady state bioenergy, or if that's an optimistic position. And then on the word dedicated, that to me that means you've got to leave the crops in the ground. You've got to leave the crops in the ground and not pull them out, because otherwise there's no the dedication isn't there. Putting something in the ground for a brief amount of time, or just felling it, is not about a dedicated system. So it's just interesting the way the language is used.
And dedicated energy crops is a term you see in all those studies. I mean, that is one of the terms used. Yeah, but you're right.
What he means by dedicated, because by dedicated energy crops, I understand that land is used exclusively for energy crops.
Yes. That's
Whether
it.
you harvest 100% or you leave it on the ground, it will depend on the kind of crop. Yeah.
So it means it's not residues. If you have like corn, maize, and you use corn stover for biomass, then it will be classed as a residue. If you use the whole maize cobs for making ethanol or biogas, then they would be classed as, because the land is dedicated just to producing that energy.